Kate Milavalcha, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. Happy Women's History Month. Last week we covered the remarkable life of Frances Perkins, and I don't think I mentioned that it's Women's History Month, so I'll mention it twice today to make up for it. And the woman that I want to honor today is Jane Addams. It's Addams with two D's, not related to John Adams, problematic president. Jane Addams was an incredible person, and I knew about her. You know, I homeschooled my kids, and I remember learning about Whole House with them because I don't remember learning it in school myself. That doesn't mean I didn't. It means I didn't remember. So I renewed my information about her when I did it with my children. But it didn't impress me the way it impressed me researching right now. I think it's because her life resonates with this time. You'll see what I mean. So let's just get right into it and look at the life of Jane Addams. She was born September 6, 1860 in Cedarville, Illinois. She was the youngest of 8 children, so she was the spoiled baby of the family. Her family was quite prosperous. They went all the way back to English colonists in Pennsylvania from the very beginning. So, rich and established family. However, when she was 2, her mother died during her 9th pregnancy. So she essentially was raised by her older sisters. By the time she was 8 years old, 4 of her siblings had died, 3 of them as infants and 1 at the age of 16. And there's no more information about that, and I'm sorry. The age of 4, she contracted tuberculosis of the spine, which is called Pott's disease. There are different forms of tuberculosis. Everybody relates to the one that settles in your lungs, but there's also tuberculosis of the bones, miliary tuberculosis. There's another kind I can't remember. It's virulent and really a difficult situation, especially in these times because there's nothing that they could do for it. So she ended up with a curvature of her spine, which was painful and gave her lifelong problems. She had a limp because of it. She couldn't run and play with the other children. And she remembers being really embarrassed to go anywhere with her father because he's this rich businessman. He was always decked out, quite dapper. And here she is limping along. She was very self-conscious about it. She adored her father. He was a big deal in the Republican Party in Illinois. He became the Illinois state senator from 1855 to 1870. So he was a state senator all through the Civil War. He was really close friends with Abraham Lincoln. He worked on Abraham Lincoln's senatorial campaign and on his presidential campaign. He had a framed picture of a letter that Lincoln sent him on his desk. And Jane talked throughout her life about always being fascinated by that letter as a child, reading it and rereading it. Her father was an agricultural businessman. He had timber interests. He had wood mills. He raised cattle. He had wool mills. I'm trying to read my handwriting. And also growing, agricultural stuff. He was the president of the Second National Bank of Freeport, Illinois. In 1868, he remarried. So let's do the math here. She was born in 1860. So she was 8 years old. Oh, I have it written down here. She was 8 years old when he remarried. So it was 6 years after his first wife died. So it doesn't seem too hasty. Often men would remarry really quickly just to have somebody to take care of this, 15 children that killed the first wife. So he remarried. He married a woman who was a widow. Her name was Anna Haldeman. Jane was 8 years old at the time. Jane was a voracious reader, and she was inspired by Dickens. Good for her. I love Dickens. To help the poor. She was also inspired. What my resource said, she was inspired by her mother's charity work. And I have to imagine this was her stepmother, because her biological mother died when she was only 2. Was there like family lore about how charitable her biological mother was? Or was her stepmother very socially conscious? I couldn't tell. She decided that she was going to be a doctor and live and work with the poor. She wanted to go to Smith College, but her father put his foot down and said, "You're not going that far away from home." And he made her choose a school closer to home. She went to Rockford Female Seminary. Now, this wasn't a full 4-year university, as you'll soon see, but it was in Illinois, so it was a compromise. She was in the first wave of American women who went to university and got degrees, and she was surrounded by those women her entire life. She excelled in school. She was the school editor. She was in debate quite prominently. She was the first in her class in 1881, and she was the valedictorian. The year previous to that, when she was a junior, she gave a speech that was remembered, still is, and, young. What was she, 20? Called The Bread Givers. She talked about women and her generation of women, and especially the ones who had the chance to be educated. She said she and others were given a new opportunity. And she said that she noticed the change in ambition and aspiration of women because of this educational opportunity. And she believed that something new, a new social wave was emerging. She said educated women wished not to be a man, nor to be like a man, but claimed the same right to independent thought and action. At the age of 20, she was recognizing changing cultural environment. It was a big movement at the time. So in 1881, she graduated. She got what was called a collegiate certificate. No explanation of what that meant. She was also a member of Phi Beta Kappa, but she wanted her bachelor's. And so she was determined to go to Smith. But that summer, her father died suddenly of appendicitis. Ugh. So the family fortunes were split up amongst all of the members of the family. And mind you, now she had 4 siblings. I don't know if her stepmother brought any children to the relationship. So let's just say a minimum of 6 people were dividing up the fortunes, and she received $1.67 million in our money. It was more like 50,000-60,000 at the time. But that was a nice chunk of change, and it gave her an element of independence. So that fall, she, her sister Alice, and her sister's husband moved with the stepmother to Philadelphia because her sister and she wanted to go to medical school. And her brother-in-law was already a doctor, and he was going for extra training. So Jane and Alice, they got through their first year of medical school at the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania. But then her spinal situation started acting up. It was really bad. She had to have surgery. She had what's described as a nervous breakdown, but put in the context of the constant disruption of her education. Her father's death, she was very close to him. And then this terrible physical problem. I don't like to imagine what spinal surgery was like in 88 or something? Let me see. 1882. So she had to stop school. It just devastated her. She was very disappointed, and she felt like a failure. And then her stepmother got sick. So they all returned to Cedarville, and I have little exclamation points all over the place here because this blew my mind. Her brother-in-law operated on her spine. And then what he recommended for her was travel, because sitting in railway cars and carriages, that'd be great for a bad back. Anyway, she did. She went on a 2-year tour of Europe with her stepmother, and she just got to see more of a variety of people outside of her narrow social class. And she realized she could help the poor without even becoming a doctor. Back home in 1887, back home in Cedarville, she had this vague ambition that was sort of free floating. She didn't quite know what to do with it. And she was really depressed. She felt like a failure. And she just was really unsure of what her future would look like. And she had this ambition to do good in the world, good things in the world, but didn't know how to go about it. Meanwhile, this was just tossed in here. I thought it was interesting. I was going to look him up, and I didn't actually remember. Her nephew was James Weber Lynn, who taught at the University of Chicago. He taught English literature, and he was actually in the Illinois General Assembly. So she had, I guess the point is here that she had political connections beyond her father's past. So she continued to be inspired by reading, which is something she could do, even if she was a little invalided by her condition. She was into reading the early Christians, like the Gnostics. She was really into that, and she was into Tolstoy, because nothing like a Russian novel to brighten your day. In 1886, she was baptized for the first time in a Christian church. She joined the Presbyterian Church. She read a book called The Duties of Man by a guy called Mazzini, who talked about democracy as a social ideal. Now, this is not widespread, commonly held belief at the time that everybody deserved to be treated well. You were kind of born into a particular class or caste, and, you know, if you pulled yourself up by your bootstraps, good for you, but most people were born into poverty and remained mired in it. And she didn't agree with that. She thought you could not be a true democracy if that was what was going on in your society. So she struggled with her role as a woman as well. She was a feminist, and she didn't like what she saw. She was especially conflicted after reading The Subjection of Women by John Stuart Mills. The book complained of social pressure put on women to marry and have children. Whatever their desire was secondary. So she read about the settlement housing movement that was flourishing in England, especially. It actually peaked in the United Kingdom and the US in the 1920s, but this is 40 years earlier. The idea of settlement housing was in an urban, low-income, poor neighborhood, there would be housing, and we're not talking houses, we're talking, you know, access to apartments, and with a communal flavor, so that some parts of the building or buildings would be apartments, low income, and they would be affiliated in a sense of community with services offered in the buildings and different buildings communally associated with each other. She was really attracted to this. This is housing shared by a volunteer middle class called settlement workers that would live with the poor, and they would share their knowledge and culture and help to alleviate poverty, you know, rising the tide and elevating all boats. So the houses in England, anyway, provided daycare, English classes, healthcare, educational and reform movement impetus. It was called activist sociology, settlement sociology. And it's important to point out that oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes the neighborhoods were immigrant neighborhoods, and the poor that they dealt with were the new arrivals who were very poor. But it was a movement that's really been neglected in sociology for a more kind of academic model, research and statistics and that kind of attitude, whereas they believed in rolling up their sleeves and getting out there and dealing with social issues that affected daily life. So the first ever settlement house was called Toynbee Hall. It was in Whitechapel in London's East End. Now, I did a little research separate of Jane Addams that I stuck in here about settlement houses because I was interested myself. The Victorians of Victorian England gave rise to this movement, which seems antithetical. It's just sort of surprising, really. They were originally connected to the university, and the idea was to put students from the university into slum areas to live and work with the locals who lived there for the purposes of passing on education, learning how to save money, providing sports activities, arts access. So this was praised by a lot of religious groups, some of them do-gooders and some of them sincere, and it was really criticized as just too moralistic by radical social movements that felt like there was a little bit too much of the what's the expression, where the member of the aristocracy deigns to bend over and help the poor. But in 1887, Jane visited Toynbee House and remained affiliated, learning about it until the next summer of 1888. She was traveling in Europe, and she at the same time watched a bullfight in Spain, and she said she was fascinated by the tradition of it, but absolutely repelled by the cruelty to animals. She dreamed of starting her own settlement house. She told her close personal friend, who we'll discuss later, Ellen Gates Starr, and Ellen agreed to help, so they went in on it together. She'd been enchanted by the Toynbee House. She thought that it was very sincere, the work they were doing. They were free of professional doing good, goody good doers. She felt that they were productive in their approach to helping people. She compared the idea of this communal commingling of the various social and economic classes to early Christian circles, like the Essenes and the earliest Christian communities. She said that they crossed cultural divides and class divides and made unexpected connections by changing the boundaries of class, culture, and education, expanding people's horizons with things like community, arts centers, and social service facilities. We'll talk a little more about what she eventually established, and it's pretty impressive. This whole idea, it laid the foundation for the American civil society, the idea that we should have a standard of living and that we should all work together to provide that standard for as many people as possible. Kind of a neutral community space that crossed ideologies and differences of financial situation. It all seems like such a pipe dream now, doesn't it? It's about finding common ground and doing it through collective action. They're trying to blend culture and issues to reconnect with diversity. I said the word. And to connect immigrant communities with the larger community, and to work for social reform for everyone who lived there. With her girlfriend, Ellen Gates Starr, in 1889, they co-founded Hull House in Chicago. Now, what they did is they were given the use of this rundown mansion built by Charles Hull in the 1850s, and it had fallen into disrepair. It needed work. She paid for the expenses to fix it up and to run operations for it for the first year at least. But it began to get attention, and it got gifts from wealthy women, long-term wealthy women, especially Helen Culver, because her name was Helen. She was Charles Hull's cousin. And when he died, she got control of his estate. She managed his estate, and she let them use the house, the mansion, rent-free. So Jane and her friend Ellen were the first to actually live in the building. And eventually 25 women lived communally in this main mansion. And it got 2,000 visitors a week. It's kind of mind-boggling. It eventually grew and morphed. I think they had 13 buildings finally, not counting the mansion eventually. It became a center for research, empirical analysis, for study, for debate. It was lived in, and it had really good relationships with the neighborhood. It was a really successful effort. Their one goal, she said, was to give privileged young people personal contact with the real life of most of the population of the United States. They worked in issues of housing, midwifery, fatigue, which, people were working 18-hour days, tuberculosis, typhoid, garbage collection, cocaine, truancy. You see all these social issues that are kind of a web, right? The core residents were well-educated women committed to labor unions, consumer issues, suffrage, pacifism. She hired a woman doctor to treat the poor. Now, I went on a little side trip of exploration of who this woman doctor was, and it was a fascinating story. So much to recognize about our very disturbing history. This woman's name was Harriet Rice. She was the first African-American graduate of Wellesley. She went on later, after her work at Hull House, she went to France and volunteered as a doctor for the French during World War I, and was decorated by the French after the war. In 1891, she got her degree from the Women's Medical College of New York, but she couldn't get a job in any American hospital because she was an African-American woman. So Jane Addams hired her, and she became the doctor at Hull House. She also became the only doctor for the Chicago Maternity Hospital, and helped train birth assistants. She died in 1958. That was all I could really find about her on a cursory exploration of her life. I have never heard of her. A remarkable woman, and there's a picture of her, and she's just formidable. So what did Hull House provide? Adult night school, which eventually became the first continuing education programs that universities all over the country were providing. Clubs for older children to keep them off the streets, public kitchens, an art gallery, which had copies of famous art, real famous art, and the art of local people. There was studio space to make art. There was a gym, a girls' club, a bathhouse, a book bindery, a music school, drama and theater, a stage and drama classes, a library, an extension of the Chicago City Library, meeting rooms for discussions, debates, clubs, etc., an employment bureau, a lunchroom, and then apartments for people to live in. And this improved and spread beyond these issues over time. They served a largely immigrant population, and they also provided hands-on training for young social workers who were at school and university learning to be social workers. It ended up being a 13-building complex. They had a playground, one of the very first playgrounds. She formed a summer camp for the kids that was called the Bowen Country Club. I thought that was cute. The art program was especially important to her, and art and creativity were things that were not emphasized in education at the time because they were just pumping out good little factory workers, So she wanted education to not just be about work training. She wanted to encourage independent thinking, critical thinking, and creativity. And she saw art as the key to mutual discovery, to imagination, to stimulating diversity, to rewriting cultural identities, and to promoting interculturalism. The art classes were open to the public, they were free, and they became extremely important to the people of the wider neighborhood. They really were important to people. They introduced art and creativity to the children of the working class who had never had the opportunity. Their parents couldn't afford, crayons or whatever. With Starr, Jane founded the Chicago Public School Art Society. So with the Chicago Public Schools, they gave schools reproductions of great world art. They hired artists to teach children in the public schools. They took students on field trips to the many Chicago museums. Chicago is one of the few large American cities I've actually been to because one of my daughters went to graduate school in Chicago. And so I've been there a couple of times, and their museums are phenomenal. There's absolutely no disagreement there. Off the top of my head, I recollect, I think it was the Chicago Art Institute. They've got incredible exhibits, and they have Native American art. They have Native American art put away in drawers because they have nowhere to show it. But they have this huge exhibit of suits of armor, medieval up until, I don't know, maybe the 1700s, early 1700s, late 1600s. Okay, Hull House. The neighborhood was a mix of European ethnic groups, recent immigrants from the beginning of the 20th century. So just for example, Germans, Jews, it's described as Jews. I'm having to extrapolate. We're talking about Jewish people who were actually Eastern European, Russian, Ukrainian, Polish, whatever. Greeks, the Irish, French Canadians, and Italians. And by the end of World War II, really the Italians were really the largest and most definitive ethnic group that still remained in any numbers. So they had principles. They had these core beliefs upon which the settlement houses were founded. The first was to teach by example. The second one was to practice cooperation. And the third was to practice social democracy. So by definition, this is egalitarian social relations across class lines. They offered civic, cultural, recreational, and educational activities. They had a lot of visitors. People loved these ideas, and they had a lot of visitors, including the future Prime Minister of Canada, whose last name was King, I think. They became a world center of social reform. They advocated locally for better housing, for greater public welfare, for stricter child labor laws, for the protection of working women. Addams was closely linked with intellectual circles. She had money, right? And philanthropists. And this was a great advantage for Hull House. In 1912, Addams started a new political party called the Progressive Party. And she worked on the campaign of Teddy Roosevelt. She would have described herself as a socialist, a pacifist, a feminist in sensibility, but she was very careful not to really label herself because she wanted to cross all boundaries. She had an unwavering commitment to social improvement through cooperative efforts. She stressed the importance of children in the Americanization of immigrants. For example, as is often the case even today, there were at the time and still today so few accessible classes in English for foreign language speakers that children often become the translators and the go-betweens for their parents, who, especially their mothers at the time, I mean, it's culturally probably still somewhat true that unless you're out in the working world, your opportunity to learn a language is really limited when there are no classes that you can have access to. And Jane Addams recognized that. And it was one way that the role of children was so vital to including their parents in their new country. And this wasn't some nationalist thing. This was just trying to be inclusive. Where am I? She embraced the idea of play and recreation. Now, this was a new idea. Children weren't children. Children were lower paying workers in factories. Children didn't have much of a childhood. And she recognized that developmentally, play was an important feature in neurological and social development. So she said, you know, you need to preserve the spirit of young children. You can't beat them down as children. So there were many programs for fun for children, recreational programs, games, contests, art, that kind of activity. She helped pass the first model tenement code. She helped to pass the first factory laws that made conditions safer for the workers. She worked with the Association of Juvenile Protective Association. She helped to form it, and she was the person that advocated to create the first probation officers for juveniles, for a juvenile court, which was a new idea. She went on to examine issues of racism, child labor and exploitation, drug abuse, prostitution, child development, and she was a huge advocate for sex workers. Well, we'll get to that. She had strong opinions about the conditions that they faced. She felt her mission was to improve the social and emotional well-being of everybody and to function, to help improve the function of the vulnerable, especially children. For them to reach their full potential, somebody had to intervene, was her point. Her group at Hull House tracked and documented the geography of disease in the neighborhood, you know, tracing contagion, locating sources like dirty water and that kind of thing. She ID'd political corruption and fought against it, and the greed that ignored public health and safety, that money was going into pockets and nothing was being done, and she put a spotlight on it. She was responsible for a more equitable distribution of city services and modern inspectors. Her first year working with the Chicago Board of Health, she got more than 1,000 health violations taken care of. She was the first vice president of the Playground Association of America. In 1912, she fought prostitution as them being victims of kidnapping and exploitation. This is not what was commonly thought in those days. She advocated for the women. She slowly moved her focus, Hull House focus, from kind of an original high culture, highfalutin intellectual, you know, well-meaning, but still, things like the efficiency movement. If you've ever read Cheaper by the Dozen, Galbraith's book, his parents were into the efficiency movement, and that book is absolutely hilarious. It gives you a little insight into what she's talking about here at Hull House. But they began more and more to be responsive to the social needs of their community, especially of children. They were able to tailor their work to meet the needs. Um, she called on women in general, American women, uh, most of whom were at the time, if they were middle class, they were home. Women have always worked. It's a fallacy, that women were at home until the 60s and then suddenly out of whole cloth they wanted to work. Women have always worked, and women have always been very important in the support of their families and often the main breadwinner. And the truth is, it's class. It's built on class and a certain group of more vocal and influential women who were in the middle class or the upper class and had access to money and free time. She shamed them. She called them out and said, you're sitting home. You're the mothers of your family. You do the housekeeping of your family. How about you come into your community and attend to some civic housekeeping? You have a duty to care for everybody's family, to care for your community beyond your family. And I should say that my attitude is me. It's not her, because she was it was always noted that she was kind and not scolding like I was being. But this emerging of women from the house, it helped to advance suffrage, as women had a completely different perspective on social issues, a unique view on social issues, and had a voice and wanted to advocate for their own voice. In 1894, Addams became the first woman sanitary inspector, and that's when she got rid of those 1,000 health department violations in 1 year. She was friends with John Dewey, and she put pragmatic social activism as an important part of democracy. You can't say you have a democracy, that all people are being treated equally, when people are not being equal, when they don't all have equal access, their living conditions are not equal. These issues need to be addressed for us to be a true democracy. She believed that you should give social and economic worlds a democratic structure. She wrote a number of books. She wrote progressive books on women's roles, like gender roles. She's been called the mother of social work. She was dedicated to teaching adults, especially adults outside of academia, who couldn't afford to go to higher education because of poverty or lack of credentials, like they'd never been to an American high school, something like that. She turned down many offers from universities who wanted to hire her to run their sociology departments because she didn't want to be controlled. She served on the Chicago Board of Education. Now, she was gay at a time when you just didn't talk about that much, right? She was romantically involved with several women over her life. Her friend Ellen was really her first serious romantic relationship. I have no idea what happened. She just sort of disappeared from the narrative here, and I don't know what that was about. It's cold here. Very brisk wind. So she described herself, I think this is funny because it didn't take me very long to glom onto what was going on with Ellen, right? But she claimed she was a celibate matron and mother to all. Then as I read further, I realized, okay, now we know what is really going on. And I'll tell you more about that soon. But she, as well as it was true of many prominent activists in the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom and in the suffrage movement, she was lesbian. This was true. These women were particularly prominent in these movements because they were not, I'm generalizing, because many of them did marry because they had no choice. They did have children because they had no choice. But there were a number of kind of well-heeled women who were lesbian, who were able to extract themselves from gender expectations and help to run these pacifist and suffrage programs. So the reality is she had a second partner after Ellen. They were together 40 years until her partner died. Her name was Mary. They owned a summer house together at Bar Harbor, Maine, because remember, she was wealthy. And they wrote letters every day to each other when they were separated. They considered themselves married. They said that they considered themselves married. Her work has often been described as like social Christian work, like it was very Christian inspired. And she did agree that she was strongly motivated by the lessons in the New Testament that imbue all human relationships with Christ's love. But that didn't make her a Christian. That made her a believer in those teachings, that narrow amount of teachings. She was non-denominational, even though she was a Presbyterian, young. She was seen as a force for secular humanism. I mean, secular humanists claim her too. They felt that she'd been taken over kind of by, or claimed, maybe labeled by Christian church groups. She was successful in her charitable works, and therefore they wanted to claim responsibility for her good works. But officially, in documents, Hull House was secular. She believed in religious freedom, but she believed even more in ecumenical cooperation. Set aside your differences, let's work on our common problems. She did believe in the living example of Jesus's life as in the New Testament. But she embraced anybody who wanted to help everybody else. She was a staunch progressive. She joined the Anti-Imperialist League in 1898. She nominated for president Teddy Roosevelt in 1912. She was the one who stood up and nominated him. In 1915, she became part of the Women's Peace Party. She then went on to speak at the International Congress of Women in The Hague in 1915. Now, keep in mind, 1915, what's going on? World War I. She worked with the leaders of the neutral countries to end the war. This was the very first in the history significant international effort against war. She started it. She wrote Women at The Hague, which was a book about her experiences there. She was described as, there's a whole long quote about her, and I cherry-picked the adjectives, basically. She was described as respectful, patient, radiating wisdom. She was made president of the League, and it eventually became the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And she traveled extensely working for them. Of course, back home, she was branded as unpatriotic. But in 1931, she won the Nobel Peace Prize. She was the first woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize. So she was a figurehead of early feminism and pacifism. Well, not early feminism, because the second, not the second wave, because there were the women in the 1840s. Whatever, the women at the time, she was a figurehead of feminism and of pacifism. She was influenced by Tolstoy, those cheery Russians. She believed that democracy, social justice, and peace were mutual and required each other. Her pacifism sprang from her objection to the Spanish-American War. I mean, that's what solidified it after 1899. She wrote about peace, social justice. Her ideas became internationally embraced after World War I. She was probably more popular internationally than she was in certain circles in the United States. Her belief was that there was a connection between war and conflict and social injustice, that the harder life was for people, the more they struggled, the more likely you were going to have conflict and war. Excuse me. And I guess look at the bread riots of the Russian Revolution. Look at the similar bread riots of the mothers in the Bolshevik Revolution, the French Revolution. So she helped her work with this women's peace group led to the Hague Conventions. And women at The Hague argued that leaving women out of policy decisions resulted in flawed policy. And they called for franchise. It really helped to push forward the vote for women. And of course, her leadership, as I said, won her the Nobel Peace Prize. She opposed interventionism during the beginning of the war. She really opposed American expansionism and American dominance, that, colonialist, white man's burden, attitude. She got booed off the stage in 1915 because she opposed intervention in World War I. She said war is a cataclysm that undermined human kindness, solidarity, and civic friendship, and caused ordinary families to struggle. She also was the first one to publicly say, the military, they liquor up the soldiers before they put them into the field, that before they go into battle, they're given drugs and alcohol. She was that was not popular, but guess what? Later on, the truth was later revealed that this was true. And nobody ever apologized to her for the awful things they said about her when she suggested that. They said she was unpatriotic. She got expelled from the DAR. She was called dangerous and naive. Something to note, that German soldiers in the Wehrmacht, Hitler's, troops on the ground, in their packs, they all received, a personal pack of stuff to take with them. They included methamphetamines or some version of methamphetamines in those packs. You can look it up. That's for sure. She fought to ban the use of poison gas in war. She advocated for positive peace. It wasn't enough to not have violence. That in order to have real peace, you had to have social justice, because this goes back to the idea that peace and war and conflict come from injustice. And she called it peace weaving, that peace wove through every aspect of life. If you don't have enough food, if you don't have housing, if you don't have medical care, if there's crime, if there's poor working conditions, if just everything, all these social ills lead to dissatisfaction and stress and tension and conflict and war. Now, nobody is perfect. And so she was a proponent of something that we now look on with raised brows. She was a supporter of eugenics. So we hear her argument. She believed that children born with issues, diseases, and there's no elaboration on really what she meant by that they would go on to cause social problems and to pass on social problems. So I don't know if she's talking about children who inherited sexually transmitted diseases through the birth process, if she's talking about children who had damage done because of alcohol use, or I don't know. There's not enough information. She also believed that a lot of these issues that got passed on caused a very high infant mortality rate, and so she advocated eugenics in those cases. And there wasn't more information. So I'm wondering if what she's talking about is providing access to abortions for women who are sex workers and have been infected, or women who have a history of drug use or whatever. I just don't know. But like I said, nobody's perfect. So take that with a flock of salt. She was prohibition. She was prohibition. She believed that alcohol was a real problem, and especially in relationship to sex work. She said, and this is a quote, houses of prostitution could not be sustained without the vehicle of alcohol. In 1926, she had a heart attack, and she died in 1935 at the age of 74, and she was buried in Cedarville, Illinois. In 1940, they did a series of commemorative stamps, postage stamps, and she was one of them. A guy called Willard Motley wrote a book in 1948, from which a movie was made in 1949 called Knock on Any Door, about the settlement houses, and it was very popular. So Jane Addams was influential in social reform on many levels: her neighborhood, her city, her state, the courts, public health, education, the arts, how birth is handled, economics, immigration policy, the plight of immigrants, recreational therapy. I mean, she helped to advance the creation and growth of recreational therapy and improvisational theater, which we're going to talk about at a different time. And she advocated and improved the situation for labor, for drama education, for playgrounds for children, for peace, for suffrage, and for sociology as a legitimate field of study and a tool for change. Members of the Hull House were the first 3 professors of sociology at the University of Chicago. They worked with the university really quite closely. Hull House went on to work with banning sweatshops and lowering the rate of child labor. Just goes on and on. I mean, I could talk for another hour about the good she did. December 10th is officially Jane Addams Day in Illinois. There's a memorial park, a Jane Addams Memorial Park near Navy Pier. And I've been to Navy Pier and I don't remember it, but then I wouldn't have been looking for it. So I probably was in it and didn't know. There's a Jane Addams Tollway. The Hull residence, the original mansion building of the original Hull House, has been turned into a museum. There is a Jane Addams School of Social Work at the University of Illinois in Chicago. Now, that's not University of Chicago. It's the University of Illinois in Chicago. In 1973, and I just cherry picked, there was a list a mile long of honors and memorials. In 73, she was put in the National Women's Hall of Fame. In 2012, her name was put on the LGBTQ Legacy Walk. In 2014, she was put on the San Francisco Rainbow Honor Walk. And she is recognized as a gay icon and the mother of sociology. So that's the really epic Jane Addams, who doesn't get nearly enough attention in any circle, but pacifism, feminism, suffrage, immigration, labor, child welfare, public health. It's just phenomenal. So in honor of Women's History Month, we honor Jane Addams. Thank you for watching. I hope there was something new in this for you. I hope it inspires you to go read about her or watch the movie. Knock on Any Door. Thanks for watching. Slángafoil. Slánge.